Who was the person before him? It was no stranger to Yang Yi, because it was Lien Suyao who'd wanted to kill him in the radiant dimension and exchange his head for permits into the large world. Yang Yi hadn't expected to encounter her here. They were naturally enemies because she'd almost killed him that day. Lien Suyao was horrified when she saw him grab the hilt of his sword, and she hurriedly spoke. What are you doing? She was afraid of Yang Yi, of course. Actually, she should be said to be quite terrified of him. After all, was anyone in the Eastern Territory not aware of how Yang Yi had slaughtered an entire city and killed over 20 deities? Over 20 deities. Actually, Lien Suyao felt quite lucky when she found out that Yang Yi had annihilated the experts of so many stellar regions. She felt lucky that she'd decided to retreat that day, because if she hadn't, then she might not exist in the world any longer. But she hadn't expected that she would actually encounter that maleficent existence. Yang Yi here. Yang Yi spoke indifferently. What? You're not going to take my head and exchange it for a permit anymore. Lien Suyao inwardly heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that Yang Yi didn't attack immediately. I gave up that day. You! Lien Suyao didn't know what to say at this point. Give in? She'd done that already. Apologize? If Yang Yi wanted to kill her, then apologizing would definitely be useless. So her fate was in Yang Ye's hands. As for fleeing, she'd given it some thought, but she was very well aware that she couldn't escape him. Yang Yi was just too quick. Meanwhile, Yang Yi didn't attack. He released his grip on the hilt of his sword and said, You're heading to the ominous territory? Lien Suyao heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this, and then she nodded. I am. Yang Yi was puzzled. Isn't it very dangerous? I'm only going to explore the outer area. She glanced at him and added, Moreover, I'm not weak. Yang Yi sized her up. Actually, Lien Suyao was right, she really wasn't weak. After all, she'd been able to go head-on against the pig-riding woman. Yang Yi asked, Do you know the ominous territory well? I know a little. She continued, You're going there too? Yang Yi nodded. Meanwhile, the man in a luxurious robe by Lien Suyao's side suddenly asked, Miss Suyao? Who's he? Lien Suyao glanced at Yang Yi, hesitated for a moment, and was just about to speak when Yang Yi suddenly spoke before her. Yi Yang, the character for Leaf and Sun. Only Zhuang Weiran, Yi Luyun, Zhuang Weitian, and Chen Yaochan knew that he'd left Clouds of Heaven stellar region. As for the outside world, he was said to still be within Clouds of Heaven stellar region, and it was naturally done so to deter others. So long as Yang Yi was there would probably be no power that dared to attack Clouds of Heaven stellar region. Besides that, he was very famous throughout the Eastern Territory, and he didn't want others to pay special attention to him. Keeping a low profile was actually the right choice on many occasions. Lien Suyao instantly understood his intentions when she heard him say that, and she immediately nodded and didn't speak further. The man in a luxurious robe glanced at Yang Yi and said, So it's Brother Yi. I'm Xing Lai and this is Ning Qing. We're heading into the ominous territory. Since you're going there as well, we can travel together. The ominous territory is extremely dangerous, so we can take care of each other if we stay in a group. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. All right. Yang Yi could discern that they were quite strong. Even though all three of them were semi-deities, they were definitely not weaker to deities. At this moment, Yang Yi understood why they'd been able to attain their current accomplishments. They were brave and strived to succeed. They knew that the ominous territory was extremely dangerous, yet they still dared to come. That was something that many senior experts couldn't do. As far as those people were concerned, they refused to risk their lives. That proved the saying that the older one was, the more afraid that person would be of death. The ominous territory was extremely dangerous indeed. But at the same time, there were great fortuitous encounters hidden within it. These geniuses dared to risk their lives. If they died, their story would come to an end. But what if they survived? Like Zhuang Weitian and the Celestial Demon Lord. They'd survived, and then they formed 3-star stellar regions and gained great status. Lien Suyao was quite surprised when she heard Yang Yi agree. She hadn't expected him to be willing to travel with them. The reason she was surprised was because she felt that Yang Yi was a sword cultivator, so he would definitely prefer to be on his own. After all, sword cultivators usually acted like that. But she felt that this was good too. It was definitely extremely good news for them if they had Yang Yi on their side. Because ordinary deities were utterly useless before Yang Yi. As far as Yang Yi was concerned, it was beneficial to follow Lien Suyao's group. He knew very little about the ominous territory, but Lien Suyao's group clearly knew much more than him. Since they dared to come here, they definitely made preparations. But he'd come here in quite a rush as he had no choice but to come because of his lifespan. After he arrived here, he had a stronger feeling that the ominous territory wasn't ordinary, so he had to be careful. It didn't take long for their group of 4 to enter Ominous City. Ominous City's entrance wasn't guarded. According to Lien Suyao, it didn't have to be guarded. Because ordinary people wouldn't come, and those who did were definitely not ordinary. Moreover, Ominous City wasn't like Stellar City. No one dared to come here and do business. The Sher clan dared to, but it wasn't necessary, because there were truly too few people who visited the city. As far as the Sher clan was concerned, it only had to control the barrier which led into the ominous territory. Ominous City wasn't huge. If it was inhabited, then it would be able to accommodate around 100,000. Actually, it was equivalent to the size of a courtyard in a large power. There were very few buildings in the city, and they were just scattered around it, causing the city to seem rather empty. Something worthy of mentioning was that the dark gray energy was even denser within the city. Presently, it wasn't just his profound energy that flowed slightly slowly. Even his breathing showed signs of slowing down. It could be said that ordinary voiders and semi-deities couldn't come here at all. Even though coming here would pose no threat to their lives, their strengths would definitely decline tremendously. Moreover, if they stayed for long, it would definitely cause huge troubles for them. Yang Yi gazed at Lien Suyao and asked, "What is this energy in the surroundings?" "Miasma." Lien Suyao spoke solemnly. "It comes from within the ominous territory. It used to be very scarce, but for some unknown reason, more and more has been seeping out." Yang Yi asked, "Is the Sher clan not doing anything about it?" Lien Suyao shook her head. "They can't, because it flows out incessantly from within the ominous territory. The only way to stop it is to enter the ominous territory. However, I'm sure you're aware how terrifying it is. Even the Sher clan doesn't dare to enter the ominous territory and do as they please. So, in the end, the Sher clan refused to do anything about it. In any case, those who dare to come here are usually not afraid of the miasma." "That's true." Yang Yi nodded. Besides that, ordinary people weren't even aware that the ominous territory existed. So, those who could get here definitely possessed extraordinary strength. Thus, he couldn't look down on anyone here. Just like Xing Lai and Ning Qing, he hadn't concealed his cultivation at all. But even if he was just a voider, the two of them hadn't looked down on him at all. Conversely, when they sized up Yang Yi from time to time, there wasn't just a trace of vigilance in their eyes. There even was a trace of seriousness. What did it mean if a voider dared to head to the ominous territory? It represented that voider was confident in his or her strength. Simply speaking, the lower a person's cultivation was in Ominous City, the more others would take that person seriously. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and gazed at Lien Suyao. "Are we going into the ominous territory right now?" She shook her head. "We can't." Yang Yi was puzzled. "Why?" She replied. "Because the sky is getting completely dark." Yang Yi was puzzled. "We can't go in at night?" She nodded. "There are ominous beings in the ominous territory, and there's the miasma as well. The miasma in there is at least 100 times thicker than it is out here. If we head in right now, we won't be able to see anything. Because the miasma can obstruct our divine sense, and it's especially so once we get in there. We aren't able to release our divine sense at all once we enter the ominous territory. Besides that, you might suffocate to death in there." She seemed to have thought of something when she spoke up to this point, and she paused for a moment before she said, "You probably won't." Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Xing Lai and Ning Qing couldn't help but glance at Yang Yi when they heard her, and there was a trace of curiosity in their eyes. They knew how strong Lien Suyao was, Yet she thought so highly of Yang Yi. So they grew even more curious about Yang Yi. Lien Suyao added, "We can only enter at noon, because the sun shines the brightest at noon. At that time, the sun will reduce the density of the miasma. Moreover, there are fewer ominous beings moving about at that time. So, the 2 hours after noon are comparatively safer." Yang Yi asked, "What if the sun is gone?" Lien Suyao spoke solemnly. "We must leave before the sun vanishes. You absolutely can't stay the night in there. Otherwise—" She couldn't help but glance at him when she spoke up to this point, and then she said, "Staying the night in there shouldn't be a big problem for you." Yang Ye's face darkened. "I know you think highly of me, but you don't have to emphasize it repeatedly. But it's best if you don't stay the night in there." Meanwhile, she continued, "Of course, it's just a suggestion." Yang Yi couldn't help but ask, "Ominous beings? What sort of ominous beings are they? Are they really that terrifying?" Lien Suyao shook her head. "I don't know. Those who do are either dead or unwilling to speak of it. In short, there are dangerous things in there." Yang Yi nodded. He was about to speak when Xing Lai suddenly said, "It's about to get dark." Lien Suyao's expression changed slightly. She said, "Let's go. Hurry up." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure shot forward. Xing Lai and Ning Qing hurriedly followed after her. Yang Yi was stunned for a moment, and then he hurried after them. It didn't take long for him to catch up to Lien Suyao. "What's wrong?" Lien Suyao's voice carried a trace of anxiety. "We must enter Death Hotel before it gets completely dark. Otherwise, we'll be finished." "Death Hotel? What the heck is that?" Yang Ye's brows were pressed tightly together. Yang Yi asked, "What's Death Hotel?" "I'll tell you in a while." As soon as Lien Suyao finished speaking, she sped up, and so did Xing Lai and Ning Qing. It didn't take long for a black stone house to appear within Yang Ye's field of vision. The stone house wasn't huge, and it merely occupied around 30 m in both length and width. As for its height, it was around 30 m as well. The stone house was made of unknown black ore, and it emanated a faint dark glow. Besides that, there was nothing special about it. Yang Yi and the others stopped, and he noticed that their expressions were extremely unsightly. Yang Yi asked, "What's wrong?" Lien Suyao shook her head. "We're late. It has closed." Yang Yi looked at the entrance to the stone house, and it was covered in a layer of dark light. Meanwhile, a wisp of surprise flashed through Yang Ye's eyes because he noticed that the dark gray energy was actually unable to get close to the stone house. Every single time it came close to the stone house, the dark gray energy would be bounced away by the dark light on the stone house. Yang Yi gazed at Lien Suyao with a puzzled expression on his face. "What's that?" Lien Suyao was used to Yang Ye's ignorance, and she immediately explained, "That stone house was made by the Shi clan, and it's to give the people heading to the ominous territory a place to rest. The stone house is made of unknown ore, and that ore has the ability to obstruct the miasma. The reason it's called Death Hotel is because if one doesn't enter it before the sky turns dark, then one will definitely die." Yang Yi frowned. "Why?" Meanwhile, Xing Lai suddenly said, "Because if we can't get in there, it means that we have to spend the night out here. The miasma here will grow more than 10 times thicker at night. At that time, we must use all our strength to resist it. Even if we can last through the night, we still might die." Yang Yi asked, "There's more danger once morning arrives?" "That's the most dangerous time." Lien Suyao glanced at Yang Yi. "The miasma isn't the most dangerous. The most dangerous are people. People." Yang Yi came to an understanding when he heard this. If they stayed the night outside Death Hotel, they would definitely have to use all their strength to resist the miasma, and that would definitely exhaust a huge amount of profound energy. In other words, once dawn arrives, they would definitely be in their weakest state. At that time, if the people within Death Hotel came out, what was the quickest way to gain wealth? Robbery. Yang Yi had done that quite a bit. Yang Yi remained silent for a moment before he said, "Can we choose to leave the city?" Lien Suyao shook her head. "We could have earlier, but it's too late now, because the miasma can even affect stellar teleportation formations at night. So they can't be utilized at night. Thus, we have no choice but to stay in the city because the miasma outside the city might be even thicker. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings. Sure enough, the miasma here was growing thicker and thicker. Even though he didn't fear it, it would exhaust a huge amount of his profound energy to resist it all night. Yang Yi gazed at the stone house in silence for a moment before he said, "Can we go in by force?" Lian Suyao's eyelids twitched, and she hurriedly said, "Don't act rashly." Yang Yi asked, "Why?" Lian Suyao said, "The barrier activates automatically at night, but it only activates once. If you break through it by force, then it won't activate again. At that time, the entire stone house will be filled by miasma, and will be besieged by all the experts in there. Moreover, you might offend the Shi clan as well." Yang Yi shrugged and abandoned his thought of forcing his way in. After all, he was a reasonable person, and he couldn't blame anyone else for being late. Lian Suyao heaved a sigh of relief when she saw Yang Yi give up on going in by force. Others may not dare to go in by force, but that absolutely didn't include Yang Yi. Fortunately, Yang Yi hadn't chosen to act rashly, or they would be in big trouble. After all, Yang Yi would offend everyone in the stone house if he did that. How could anyone who dared to come to the ominous territory be easy to deal with? Meanwhile, Xinglai spoke solemnly, "Let's look for a spot to spend the night." Lian Suyao nodded, glanced at the surroundings, and her gaze stopped at the entrance to the city. "Let's go there." Xinglai and Ning Qing nodded. It was naturally the best choice, because once anything happened, they could flee right away. After all, one couldn't fly within ominous city. The four of them went over to the entrance to the city. There was a faint barrier of light at the entrance right now. However, it was translucent and it allowed passage. However, it wasn't able to fully obstruct the miasma. Fortunately, it wasn't that bad because it made it difficult for the miasma to enter the city. In short, it was better than nothing. They sat cross-legged on the ground, withdrew divine crystals, and started to absorb them. Yang Yi was in a comparatively better state while Lian Suyao and the others had extremely solemn expressions on their faces, because it was definitely a situation of life and death for them, and they didn't know if they could persist through the night. Lian Suyao glanced at Yang Yi. She knew that Yang Yi was definitely capable of keeping himself safe. As for whether Yang Yi would help them, she didn't know the answer to that question. After all, they were just traveling together with Yang Yi, and there was some enmity between her and Yang Yi. Would Yang Yi really let bygones be bygones? She didn't know. But no matter what, she couldn't rely on Yang Yi, so she had to rely on herself. They started to absorb profound energy while the miasma around them grew thicker and thicker. Especially the miasma outside the city, it was thick to an extremely terrifying level. Could be said that they could see nothing but miasma. It was slightly better in the city, but it wasn't much better. At this moment, they'd started to circulate their profound energy to resist the miasma and prevent it from entering their bodies. It was fine if they just sucked in a little, but if too much entered their bodies, then it would cause huge problems. As time slowly trickled by, the miasma within the city seemed practically solid. They were just less than 3 m away from each other, but they couldn't see anyone. In the end, for safety's sake, they sat cross-legged together and combined their auras to resist the miasma around them. Yang Yi had thought about entering the primordial pagoda, but he gave up on that thought in the end. He had to be in an absolutely safe place before entering the primordial pagoda. Otherwise, if the spot he entered the primordial pagoda suffered even the slightest attack, he might suffer a similar fate as Xiaoqi. Ominous City was filled with danger, so he didn't dare to enter the primordial pagoda. Late at night, the miasma was at an extremely terrifying level. It could be said that the miasma was capable of killing an ordinary voider. Even an ordinary semi-deity would be absolutely unable to resist the miasma. Not to mention Lian Suyao's group of 3, even Yang Yi felt it to be quite strenuous. Moreover, it exhausted quite a huge amount of his profound energy. Now, he understood why Lian Suyao and the others had such unsightly expressions on their faces. It was because spending the night here consumed too much energy. Once dawn arrived, they would definitely be at their weakest. If someone held ill intent towards them, they would definitely be in extreme danger. Time passed slowly. At this moment, all of them were just holding on until dawn arrived. Suddenly, Yang Yi opened his eyes and gazed at the entrance of the city. Around 5 breaths of time after Yang Yi opened his eyes, Lien Suyao and the others opened their eyes as well, and they gazed at the entrance as well. A short while passed before the miasma there moved slightly, and it didn't take long for a person to walk out from the miasma and appear before them. It was an old man in a black robe. The old man's body was covered in a faint barrier of light, and it pushed the miasma away before the miasma could even get close to the old man. Solemn expressions appeared on Lien Suyao and the others' faces, and it was the same for Yang Yi. It was because he couldn't see through the old man, but Yang Ye's intuition told him that the old man was extremely dangerous. The old man glanced at Yang Ye's group, and a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. Obviously, he hadn't expected to encounter them here. He glanced at them, and his gaze paused on Yang Yi for a moment before he continued forward. It didn't take long for him to vanish from their fields of vision. Even though their cultivations were lower than the old man didn't dare to underestimate them. There was a type of people called monstrous geniuses, and surmounting their realms of cultivation to do battle was absolutely normal for them. Simply speaking, no one dared to underestimate anyone in Ominous City. Yang Yi and the others withdrew their gazes, but only an instant passed before they simultaneously looked towards the entrance again. Another person walked out slowly from within the miasma. It was a woman. She wore a violet dress. Her appearance couldn't be seen clearly because she wore a mask that covered half her face. The entire right side of her face was concealed beneath the mask. There was a saber hanging on the woman's waist, and it didn't have a sheath. The saber was less than 1 m long, thin as the wing of a cicada, and practically translucent. She glanced at Yang Ye's group, and then started walking forward. But she suddenly stopped when she passed by Yang Yi, and she said, "You're a sword cultivator?" She didn't gaze at Yang Yi as she spoke. How did she know? Yang Yi frowned, but it didn't take long for him to come to an understanding. He hadn't concealed his sword intent, so she probably sensed it. Yang Yi didn't know why she asked, but he still nodded, yes. As soon as he finished speaking, the saber on her waist suddenly vanished. A moment later, a ray of cold light flashed. Hiss! A strand of blood sprayed from Yang Ye's throat. Lien Suyao and the others only reacted when they saw the blood spray. They were horrified, and it was especially so for Lien Suyao. Yang Yi died just like that? Yang Yi wasn't dead, of course. He'd moved 3 m back at the instant the saber had cut open his skin. Yang Yi hadn't expected her to attack, so he'd only been able to react passively. However, his reaction wasn't slow. Moreover, he was vigilant towards her, so he'd been able to dodge at the critical moment. But the woman's attack was truly too swift. So, he'd almost had his throat cut open. A saber cultivator. Just like the pig-riding young woman, this young woman was a saber cultivator too. However, unlike the pig-riding young woman who focused on strength to crush all her opponents, the masked woman in front of him clearly focused on speed. Needless to say, both the pig-riding young woman's focus on strength and the masked woman's focus on speed were extremely strong. Moreover, her attack hadn't been enhanced by saber intent. Under such circumstances, she'd still been able to pierce through his defenses with such ease. So, it was obvious how terrifying her attack was. Yang Yi rubbed his throat. The skin there had been cut open, and the saber only had to go a little bit deeper to cut into his trachea. He glanced at the blood on his palm, and then gazed at the woman. A moment later, his figure vanished on the spot, and he was by the woman's side when his figure appeared once more. He drew his sword and swung it, the true form of Heavenrend. He didn't ask her why she'd suddenly attacked. All he knew was that she wanted to kill him. Since it was like that, it was pointless to ask all of that. Yang Ye's sword descended, and her saber shot forward. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then the masked woman was pushed over 300 m away. As for Yang Yi, he merely moved around 10 m back. Right when the others thought Yang Yi had gained the upper hand, the masked woman suddenly appeared by Yang Ye's side. A ray of cold light flashed. Hiss! A strand of blood sprayed from Yang Ye's right arm, and Yang Yi was already around 100 m away. How swift! Lien Suyao and the others had extremely solemn expressions on their faces, because the woman's saber techniques and speed were extremely swift. Yang Ye's face was extremely solemn. Her speed had surpassed his expectations a little. His arm would have been sliced off if he had been just a little slower. There was always someone stronger in this world. Yang Yi had never felt that he was invincible in the younger generation. He was very clearly aware that the world was huge, and there were countless experts in it. Perhaps there weren't many geniuses who were more monstrous than him, but there were definitely not just a few as well. Now he'd encountered one of them. Again, as soon as the woman finished speaking, she vanished on the spot. Yang Ye's pupils constricted, and then he closed his eyes. As soon as he did, a ray of cold light flashed. At the same time that it flashed, a ray of light from a sword suddenly appeared. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then both rays of light vanished in an instant. Meanwhile, the woman was back where she had been standing a moment ago, and Yang Yi was still on the spot. Who had won? A long moment of silence ensued before the masked woman spoke abruptly. It's rare to encounter the ability to destroy all techniques with a single attack. Not bad. As soon as she finished speaking, she paid no further attention to Yang Yi and just started walking forward. Suddenly, Yang Yi appeared in front of her and said, "I dealt with 3 attacks from you, but you only dealt with one of mine. That isn't really fair, right?" She nodded. "Give it a try then." Of course. As soon as Yang Yi finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that shot forward. He didn't execute Heaven Rend. Unless he overlapped 2 Heaven Rends, it was impossible for his attacks to pose a threat to him. After all, she'd proven that when he executed Heaven Rend earlier. Yang Ye's sword stabbed forward. It was just a simple stab and there was nothing special about it. When the sword arrived before her, the woman swiftly swung her saber. Meanwhile, Yang Ye's sword suddenly transformed from a stab to a sideways flick. Clang! A clear sound of collision resounded as the woman's saber shook violently. Moreover, it wasn't just her saber that shook. Even her hand shook as well. Because Yang Yi had suddenly stabbed at the weakest point on her saber, causing the strength and speed it carried to be dispersed by around 90%. After he dealt with her attack, Yang Yi didn't stop and stabbed forward extremely swiftly. The tip of his sword stabbed straight at her chest. At this moment, Yang Ye's speed was swift to its limits. Hiss! Hiss! 2 strands of blood sprayed out, one from the woman and one from Yang Yi. At this moment, she was over 100 m away, and there was a fine hole in her chest. That strand of blood had come from there. As for Yang Yi, there was an injury on his arm, and blood was seeping out from it. It was a cut the woman had caused while she retreated. She was too swift, so she'd been able to retreat with ease while striking him. Her speed was truly too swift. Amazing! The masked woman spoke abruptly. "If we have the chance, I'll fight you again another day." As soon as she finished speaking, she started walking off into the distance, and it didn't take long for her to vanish from their fields of vision. Yang Yi didn't go after her, because it was impossible to kill her unless he executed an overlapped Heaven Rend, and even if he succeeded at killing her, his profound energy would definitely be exhausted. After all, he'd exhausted most of it from resisting the miasma. So, if he executed an overlapped Heaven Rend, then his profound energy would be exhausted, even if he had the World Mend Stone. Of course, he could release the celestial demon wolves, but doing that would be equivalent to exposing a trump card of his. It was best to not rashly reveal a trump card at such a dangerous place. Moreover, even if he released the demon wolves, he may not be able to kill her because she was really too swift. He could imagine that if she refused to fight and chose to flee, then the demon wolves would definitely be incapable of catching up to her. However, he could try to chase after her if Xianxia was willing to help. In short, it wasn't wise to expose his trump cards just to kill her. So Yang Yi hadn't chosen to try and kill her. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts, gazed at Lien Suyao and said, "Who was that?" Lien Suyao shook her head. "I've never heard of her. She might be a genius from a different territory." Yang Yi nodded, and then he glanced at the surroundings. Dawn is almost here. Seize this opportunity to recover. Lien Suyao and the others glanced at him, and then they nodded. At this moment they felt beyond shocked. Lien Suyao took it comparatively better because she knew who he was. So, she wasn't that shocked by the strength he revealed. But Xinglai and Ningqing were different. They didn't know who he was. In their eyes, that voider called Yi Yang actually possessed such terrifying strength. As it was said, never look down on anyone in the ominous territory. At this moment, Yang Yi thought the same way too. Because if he hadn't maintained vigilance when facing that woman just now, he might have been caught off guard and killed. There was around an hour left before the sun rises. This hour was like torture to Lien Suyao and the others. It wasn't very difficult for them to persist until dawn arrived. The real problem was what would happen after dawn arrived. Sometimes, humans were the most terrifying existences. Yang Yi wasn't thinking about all of that like Lien Suyao and the others were. The scenes of his battle with the masked woman were playing in his mind. Even though he'd used his ability to locate flaws to deal with her attacks, only he knew how dangerous that battle had been. Because her speed was truly too swift. It could be said that if he hadn't attained the Voider realm, then he would have been absolutely incapable of dealing with her attacks. They were the fastest attacks he'd ever seen. Actually, he hoped to spar with her, because sparring with her was tremendously beneficial to him. If he could get used to her speed, then what would that mean? It would mean that his reaction speed would be tremendously improved. At that time, unless an opponent of his could surpass her speed would be of no threat to him. Sparring with a true expert was very beneficial. At their level, the most important to them wasn't formidable techniques but speed and strength. When speed and strength were at a certain level, then not to mention the laws, even domains could be overcome by force. After all, the simplest moves were the most terrifying on many occasions. Just like his battle with the masked woman. They hadn't utilized sword intent or saber intent, nor had they utilized any laws. Moreover, they hadn't utilized any techniques either. They just used the simplest attacks. However, the might of such attacks wasn't inferior to formidable techniques. After all, he'd executed Heavenrend once, yet it hadn't been able to harm her at all. On the contrary, utilizing his ability to locate flaws in her attacks had allowed him to injure her instead. Of course, techniques and the laws were extremely important as well. But if one's strength and speed were extremely great, then the might of the techniques one executed would grow tremendously as well. Strength and speed were the foundation. Time trickled by. It didn't take long for a ray of sunlight to appear outside the entrance to the city. The rays of sunlight gradually increased, and the visibility outside the city gradually grew better. At the same time, the miasma within the city grew fainter. Another short while passed, and then the situation within and outside the city had become just as it had been when Yang Yi arrived here. Even though miasma was still present, it was much lesser than it had been. Meanwhile, Lien Suyao suddenly shouted, "Watch out!" Yang Yi turned around, and he saw a figure dashing swiftly towards them. The figure was roaring with laughter, and that person's laughter was filled with happiness. There really are those who seek death. Ha ha ha. There were 3 other people behind the figure. In the eyes of those 4 fellows, Yang Ye's group was like a group of sheep that was exposed before a pack of wolves. Was a reason needed to kill someone? And most times it wasn't necessary. If you're weak, then you deserve to die. The strong preyed on the weak in this world where the strong were respected, and that was especially the case in the ominous territory. Goodness and evil? Many didn't care about that. As far as they were concerned, there was only the strong and the weak. That was why many in this world were fond of bullying the weak. The kind were always bullied, just like this very moment. They knew that Yang Yi and the others were weak, so they wanted to kill Yang Ye's group, because they would definitely be able to gain a huge amount of wealth from killing Yang Ye's group. The person in the lead was extremely swift, and his aura was very formidable as well. Even though he was only a semi-deity, his imposing aura was much more terrifying than some of the deities Yang Yi had met. Lien Suyao and the others had extremely calm expressions on their faces because they'd expected that this would happen. Suddenly, Yang Yi raised his hands, I surrender! Lien Suyao and the others were stunned. The green-robed man who charged over to Yang Yi stopped as well, and there was a trace of astonishment in his eyes. Obviously, he hadn't expected Yang Yi to react like that, and he'd been ready for an intense battle. After all, anyone who came to the ominous territory was definitely someone who was bold and wouldn't be willing to just wait for death to arrive. However, he hadn't expected this man before him to actually surrender. The other three behind the green-robed man stopped as well. Just like the green-robed man, there was a trace of shock in their eyes. Meanwhile, the masked woman and the old man who stood not too far away to the right had looked over as well. The old man frowned slightly. He glanced at Yang Yi, and then he closed his eyes again. As for the woman, she sized up Yang Yi, and there was a trace of curiosity in her eyes. Meanwhile, Yang Yi passed over his spatial ring and the ancient sheath which had the sword precursor in it. You seek wealth. Fine, I'll give it to you. I presume you definitely have no intention to fight us to the death, right? The green-robed man sized up Yang Yi. Are you sure? Absolutely. Yang Yi continued. To be honest, if it was before this, then the four of us would have no need to fear your group. Yet now, my profound energy is almost exhausted. I can't fight all of you at all. So, I'm willing to give up my possessions to preserve my life. After all, so long as I'm still alive, I can earn more in the future, right? That does make sense. The green-robed man continued. However, why do I feel like you're scheming against me? Yang Ye's face stiffened, but it quickly returned to normal. So, you want both my wealth and life? The green-robed man gazed at Yang Yi for a long time, and then he said, Toss it over. After all, if someone acted unusually, then that person was definitely scheming something. So it wasn't wrong to be a little cautious. Yang Yi shrugged and tossed them over to the man. The man took a deep and long glance at Yang Yi, and then he gazed at the spatial ring and ancient sheath. He'd intended to check the spatial ring first, but he was stunned when he saw the ancient sheath. Is this an origin rank treasure? The green-robed man's voice was trembling. He stretched out his hand to grab the ancient sheath while he spoke. However, at the moment he did, a ray of dazzling light suddenly erupted from the ancient sheath, and then the sword precursor left it. Hiss! The man's right hand was instantly sliced into two. Meanwhile, Yang Yi had appeared in front of the man. Clang! The sword entered the sheath on its own, and then it transformed into a ray of light that flew into Yang Ye's grasp. A moment later, Yang Yi drew his sword and swung it. The green-robed man was shocked. At the critical moment, his remaining hand emanated a green glow as he raised it to stop Yang Ye's sword. Bang! Hiss! Half of the man's arm instantly flew up into the air while accompanied by a pillar of blood, and his figure was blasted flying. As he flew in the air, a fountain of blood sprayed from his mouth and his severed arm. Meanwhile, the other three men recovered from their shock, and their faces fell. They charged at Yang Yi, but it didn't take long for Lien Suyao and the others to obstruct their path. At this moment, Lien Suyao was extremely happy because Yang Yi had attacked. Actually, she was quite worried that Yang Yi would just leave on his own. If that happened, then the three of them would definitely not be a match for the green-robed man's group of four. However, Yang Yi hadn't left. Even though the way he attacked was quite strange, he'd attacked. Lien Suyao was full of confidence when she had Yang Yi on her side. Actually, she was very well aware that if Yang Yi exposed his identity and the people here found out about his past deeds, then they would absolutely not dare to look for trouble with her group. Unfortunately, Yang Yi wanted to keep a low profile. Fortunately, he joined the battle. Yang Yi walked slowly towards the green-robed man. Needless to say, the green-robed man's strength had exceeded Yang Ye's expectations a little, because the man had forcefully resisted a heaven rend from him and survived. He could imagine that if he hadn't tricked the man like he had, he would probably have to spend a huge amount of time to kill the green-robed man. Even though the green-robed man was still alive, he'd practically lost the ability to fight. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to arrive in front of the man, and the man stared at Yang Yi as he said, "You tricked me." Actually, he'd expected that Yang Yi intended to trick him, and that was why he'd been vigilant against Yang Yi at all times. So long as Yang Yi made the slightest unusual movement, then he would be able to counterattack immediately. However, he hadn't expected the attack to come from the sword in the ancient sheath. He'd been completely fooled. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, "Do you want to live?" The man spoke in a low voice. "What are you trying to say?" Yang Yi replied, "Hand over a strand of your soul and I'll let you live. You want me to be your puppet?" The man's face turned gloomy. "Don't even dream about it." "I." Hiss. A ray of light flashed, and the man's voice stopped abruptly. He stared fixedly at Yang Yi. "I haven't finished speaking. I'm willing." He hadn't finished speaking before his head tilted to the side and rolled off his neck. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. "You haven't finished speaking?" Yang Yi shook his head. "It's your fault for not speaking faster. My sword is very swift." As he spoke, he waved his right hand, and the man's spatial ring immediately flew into his grasp. Yang Yi glanced at its contents, and a wisp of surprise instantly flashed through his eyes, because he hadn't expected it to actually contain over 100,000 divine crystals. Moreover, there were 2 void rank daggers in it. Void rank treasures were very useful to him. Moreover, even if he didn't use them, he could give them away to Zhuang Weiran and the others. Yang Yi put the spatial ring away, and then he turned to look at the masked woman. The woman was looking at him as well. Yang Yi paid no further attention to her and started walking towards the 3 men that were in battle with Lian Suyao's group. At this moment, Lian Suyao and the others were completely suppressed in battle. They were naturally not weaker than those 3 men. However, it couldn't be helped because they'd exhausted too much profound energy while resisting the miasma all night. So they didn't have much energy left. The 3 men were horrified when they noticed Yang Yi approaching, and they didn't hesitate to vanish into the distance. Yang Yi was stunned. Am I that terrifying? Yang Yi didn't chase after them, because he needed time to recover his profound energy. He would be entering the ominous territory at noon. At that time, he had to be at his peak. There were countless experts in this place, and the ominous territory was filled with unexpected danger. So he had to be careful. "Thank you." Meanwhile, Lian Suyao gazed at Yang Yi. Her gratitude came from the heart, because Yang Yi could have just left. Based on the strength Yang Yi possessed, Yang Yi could have just left. But he hadn't. Yang Yi smiled. It was nothing. He wasn't a pedantic person. Having more friends was better than having more enemies at a place like this. Lian Suyao and the others were weaker than him, but they weren't weak. Just like the previous battle. If Lian Suyao and the others hadn't kept those 3 men busy, then it would have been impossible for him to kill that green-robed man unless he exposed some of his trump cards. As far as Yang Yi was concerned, he intended to keep as many trump cards as he could. He believed that Lian Suyao and the others definitely had their own trump cards. Or it should be said that everyone had trump cards. If they really entered into a battle of life and death, then it would be a competition of who had the most and the strongest trump cards. Lian Suyao glanced at Yang Yi and nodded. Let's recover quickly and strive to regain our peak strength before entering the ominous territory. Yang Yi nodded, and then they immediately sat down cross-legged and started to madly absorb the energy within divine crystals. Ominous City was very quiet, or it should be said to be perfectly silent. Felt like a dead city. There were some people here, but most were vigilant towards each other. So besides the people in their own respective groups, they didn't talk to others or move about in the city. Everyone was waiting for noon to arrive. Time trickled by. It didn't take long for the sun to rise high up in the sky, and the miasma in the city seemed even thinner beneath the sun's radiance. Meanwhile, the old man who had been seated cross-legged in the distance had stood up, and he vanished. After that, the masked woman stood up and vanished as well. Let's go as well. As soon as she finished speaking, Lian Suyao stood up and started walking forward. All of them arrived at the center of Ominous City under Lian Suyao's lead. There was a huge stone platform there, and a circle of dark light resided on the platform. At this moment, countless strands of dark gray energy were seeping out of the circle of light. Lian Suyao spoke solemnly. That's the teleportation formation which leads to the ominous territory. Xianxia nodded, and then he gazed at the teleportation formation. There was an old man by its side. Every person who entered the teleportation formation handed a spatial ring to the old man before entering it. Obviously, it was the entrance fee. The entrance fee was truly shockingly high. It was actually 30,000 divine crystals. 30,000. The Shi clan is really great at earning money. Xianxia shook his head. It's even faster than stealing. Xianxia had just stolen 100,000 divine crystals, but he'd instantly given a third of it away right now. Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly gazed at Xianxia. Because some issues have arisen with the teleportation formation, we'll be teleported to a random location within the ominous territory. So be careful. Don't be careless. It'll be random? Xianxia nodded. All right. It didn't take long for it to be their turn. They paid the entrance fee and entered the teleportation formation. Some time passed before Xianxia opened his eyes slowly. Ah! At the instant Xianxia opened his eyes, a shrill cry suddenly resounded from not too far behind him. After that, Xianxia's expression changed while the hairs throughout his body stood on end. Screech! A strange and ear-piercing cry resounded from behind Xianxia. It was extremely terrifying because Xianxia felt like his head was about to explode apart. Moreover, his soul was actually trembling slightly. What the heck is that? Xianxia didn't have the time to think so much about it. He immediately turned around, drew his sword, and swung it. Hiss! Space rippled violently, but his sword hit nothing. There was nothing in front of Xianxia. Xianxia's face grew even more solemn. He glanced at the surroundings. Only now did he realize that the miasma here was even more terrifying than he'd expected. The visibility he had here was only around 1 m, and he couldn't see anything beyond that distance. The miasma here could be said to be much thicker than it had been in Ominous City last night. But it was noon right now. So, how terrifying would the miasma here be at night? Xianxia remained silent for a moment, and then he flipped his palm. A scroll container appeared in his grasp. The old man from the Shi clan had given it to him when he entered the teleportation formation. Actually, everyone who entered the ominous territory was given one. It was a teleportation scroll. So long as he crushed it, he would be instantly teleported out of the ominous territory. He'd never thought about leaving before this. After all, he was quite confident in himself. Yet now, this place was really not normal. Xianxia took a deep breath and put the scroll away. After that, he waved his right hand, and Big Blackie appeared in front of him. Big Blackie's pupils constricted when it saw the scene before it, and then Xianxia noticed deep fear appear in its eyes. Besides fear, there was a trace of horror. It didn't take long for it to try and enter the primordial pagoda, but Xianxia stopped it. So long as he willed it, others couldn't enter the primordial pagoda. Big Black shot Xianxia a pleading gaze when it saw Xianxia stop it from entering the primordial pagoda. Xianxia's face grew even more solemn when he witnessed this scene. Based on his understanding, both Big Blackie and Little Blackie weren't adults yet. Yes, these two celestial demon beasts hadn't reached maturity yet. Even though they weren't adults, their strength was beyond doubt. It could be said that there really were few in the lower dimensions who were capable of killing them. But they were so terrified of this place. In other words, there were existences here that were even more terrifying than them, and those existences weren't just slightly more terrifying than them. Even though Big Blackie had become much smaller than before, it was still many times larger than Xianxia. So, Xianxia had no choice but to soar up into the air and rub its head while he spoke softly. "What are you afraid of?" Big Blackie remained silent for a long time before it raised its claw and started waving it about. Xianxia's face darkened when he saw this. Again? In the past, the violet mink had done that, and so had Snowy. Now, the celestial demon wolf was doing the same. Actually, it was very normal because not all beasts could speak. Especially one like the Big Blackie who'd rarely met humans in the past. After all, it had rarely encountered humans while living in the ominous territory in the past. Moreover, beasts weren't fond of speaking the human tongue. Just like how no human was fond of speaking the beast's tongue. Besides Xianxia. However, he wasn't speaking it and he just understood it. A short while passed before Yang Yi understood Big Blackie. It was telling him that the ominous territory was extremely dangerous, and it was asking him to leave quickly. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he said, "I can't leave. I must get to the Forest of Darkness. Can you take me there?" This damnable place was covered in miasma, so he had no choice but to make Big Blackie lead him to the Forest of Darkness. Otherwise, if he were to search himself, then he really didn't know how long it would take for him to locate his objective. Big Blackie hurriedly shook its head and started waving its claws. It was telling him to leave immediately. Yang Yi didn't order Big Blackie by force. After all, it was telling him that for his own good. Yang Yi pondered deeply for a short while and said, "Remember that big fellow who dragged you into me? Xianxia." Fear instantly appeared in Big Blackie's eyes. Even though it was a ferocious beast as well, it was clearly on a lower level than Xianxia. Xianxia had fought two of them without falling into a disadvantaged position. Most importantly, Xianxia wasn't at his full strength, and his injuries hadn't been fully healed. In short, the celestial demon wolves were quite afraid of Xianxia. Yang Yi said, "Are there existences in here that are stronger than him?" Big Blackie fell silent and seemed to be making a comparison. A long time passed before it nodded. Yang Yi couldn't help but clench his fists when he saw this. There are existences here that are more terrifying than Xianxia. What the heck is this place? This time, Yang Yi had really become serious. He couldn't just avoid being careless in this place. He had to be absolutely serious as well. Otherwise, he might really lose his life here. Yang Yi took a deep breath and gazed at the demon wolf. After that, he told it why he was here. He naturally couldn't just use force when dealing with Big Blackie and Little Blackie, because if he did that, it would naturally make them have the intent to turn on him. The best method was to form a good relationship with them, just like the one he had with Xianxia. Once he formed a good relationship with them, he wouldn't have to give them orders anymore, because they would help him on their own accord. Big Blackie remained silent for a very long time, and then it nodded and agreed to take Yang Yi. Actually, while Yang Yi wanted to form a good relationship with them, they wanted to form a good relationship with Yang Yi as well. They were under Yang Ye's control right now, so it would definitely be extremely beneficial to them if they formed a good relationship with Yang Yi. Moreover, they weren't so against being bound to Yang Yi anymore. It was because of the primordial pagoda. Actually, they liked living in the primordial pagoda. However, the precondition was that it didn't target them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a paradise but hell. Yang Yi didn't waste more time. He immediately got on Big Blackie. Even though Big Blackie still wasn't really willing to let Yang Yi ride him, it didn't refuse. In any case, Yang Yi had rode it in the past, so another round wasn't a big deal. Just like that, the pair of man and wolf started traveling forward. Big Blackie traveled quite slowly. Yang Yi had asked it to speed up, but it shook its head in response. It didn't take long for Big Blackie to make Yang Yi understand the reason. There were too many dangerous things here, so they couldn't make too much noise. Otherwise, it would draw the attention of many dangerous things. Obviously, those dangerous things were a threat even to Big Blackie. Yang Yi sized up the surroundings incessantly as he rode Big Blackie. He still felt some lingering fear towards the ear-piercing screech from before, and it was mostly because he hadn't even seen a shadow of its owner. That mysterious thing had definitely intended to attack him. But for some unknown reason, it had abandoned its intentions. Perhaps it was because his reaction was too quick and caused its surprise attack to fail, or perhaps there was some other reason. However, no matter what the reason was, that thing's strength was beyond doubt. Now, Yang Yi finally understood why even deities didn't dare to come here. If an ordinary deity had faced that situation, then perhaps that deity would have died on the spot. After traveling for some time, a ferocious glow suddenly flashed through Big Blackie's eyes. Meanwhile, Yang Yi frowned as well, and he placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. Screech! Suddenly, a sharp and ear-piercing cry resounded around Yang Yi. It seemed to possess penetrative force, and it caused sharp pain to come from Yang Ye's mind. It was a soundwave attack that couldn't be warded off. Yang Yi hurriedly released his sword intent and formed an invisible barrier of sword intent around himself. Only then did his head feel slightly better. He glanced at the surroundings, but he didn't notice anything. Xianxia's face became gloomy. The sharp pain was actually quite terrifying. If an ordinary deity was caught off guard, then it was very likely for that deity to be temporarily dazed. But Xiangyi didn't suffer from such effects because the sharp pain was simply too inferior when compared to the intense pain which he'd suffered from the backlash of his sword intent. He'd even been able to withstand that, so such sharp pain was just normal pain to him. However, Xiangyi was definitely unhappy because someone or something was watching him from the shadows. But he couldn't detect its tracks because the miasma could obstruct his divine sense, and that existence was hiding within the miasma. This put him in a very passive position. Right when Xiangyi felt quite helpless, Big Blackie suddenly raised its front claws and slammed them against the ground. Boom! At this moment, the entire ground quaked. It wasn't just the ground that quaked, even space shook, and then Big Blackie opened its mouth and roared. Boom! A terrifying aura surged out explosively from the celestial demon wolf, and then the miasma was blasted away. The miasma was pushed far away, but it didn't take long for the miasma to surge back around them. Big Black was ceaselessly scanning the surroundings. Its eyes were filled with a vicious glow, and it roared furiously from time to time. Xiangyi nodded to himself as he sat on Big Blackie's back, as expected of an ominous beast. It really is quite terrifying once it gets mad. After Big Blackie made a show of strength, they didn't encounter any further danger all along the way. It was mainly because Big Blackie was ceaselessly emanating its aura that belonged to an ominous beast. Even though it made their journey slightly smoother, Xiangyi still had an extremely solemn expression on his face. It wasn't just Xiangyi. Even Big Blackie's eyes were filled with seriousness and vigilance, because even though Big Blackie's aura could force some dangerous things here to dare not look for trouble with them, it may draw the attention of even more terrifying things. They were treading on thin ice. That was how Xiangyi felt after he arrived at this damnable place. Needless to say, it was really quite a grieving. With the strength both he and Big Blackie possessed, was there a place in the lower dimensions that they couldn't go to? However, they had to be absolutely careful at all times while they were here, and they were absolutely afraid that something terrifying would suddenly show itself before them. After traveling forward for some time, Big Blackie suddenly stopped moving. Xiangyi was about to speak when he suddenly raised his head and looked forward. The miasma there started to move slowly, and a short while passed before Xiangyi seemed to have seen something, causing his pupils to constrict. What had he seen? A huge mountain. A huge mountain that blotted out the sky was slamming down in his direction. It felt like the sky was collapsing down upon him. A wisp of ferocity flashed through his eyes, and then he transformed into a ray of light that shot up into the air. Once he arrived in the sky, Xiangyi drew his sword and swung it. OM! A sword howl resounded as a ray of sword energy tore through the air, and it slammed against the mountain. Hiss! Bang! The mountain collapsed apart once his sword energy shot into it, and countless pieces of rubble and dust erupted from it and shot through the sky. A long time passed before the sky gradually returned to normal. Meanwhile, a rock titan was standing in front of Xiangyi and Big Blackie. The rock titan was huge, completely made of unknown faint silver rock, and it held a pair of rock axes. Xiangyi had a solemn expression on his face because that mountain from before had been brought over by that fellow in front of him. Xiangyi was very confident in his own strength, and destroying that mountain wasn't difficult at all. However, if it was lifting and moving that mountain, then he might be able to give it a try once his physical strength was multiplied by 3 times at least. I can't use brute strength against it. Meanwhile, Xiangyi suddenly noticed that the rock titan wasn't looking at him, and it was looking at the celestial demon wolf. A moment of silence ensued before the rock titan suddenly spoke. Death to intruders of Rock Mountain. As soon as it finished speaking, it raised its rock axe and swung it down at the demon wolf. The rock axe was many times larger than Xiangyi, and it was extremely swift. Xiangyi merely saw a ray of white light flash before it arrived in front of Big Blackie. Big Blackie was naturally unwilling to display any weakness, and it immediately slammed its claws against the ground and shot towards the rock axe. Boom! An explosion resounded, and then Big Blackie was actually pushed back to where it had been standing just moments ago. As for the rock axe, It had transformed into a ray of white light that flew back into the rock titan's grasp. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. He was about to attack when the celestial demon wolf beneath him shook its head to indicate that he shouldn't attack for now. Big Blackie turned to look at the rock titan, and then numerous ripples swept towards the rock titan. A short while passed before the rock titan shook its head and gazed at Xianxia. "Human, leave immediately or I'll smash you into bits." Meanwhile, Big Blackie turned to look at Xianxia, and then it started waving its claws. A short while passed before Xianxia understood what was going on. This was Rock Mountain. As for what Rock Mountain represented, he had no idea. In any case, this was Rock Mountain, and it was the territory of the Rock Titan. The Rock Titan had attacked them because they'd entered its territory. But they had to pass through Rock Mountain to get to the Forest of Darkness. Of course, they could go around. However, it would consume a huge amount of time. Because Rock Mountain was huge. Even with the demon wolf speed, it would take at least around a day to go around Rock Mountain. Moreover, if they went around it, they may encounter even more danger. So Rock Mountain was their best choice. However, the Rock Titan was in their path. "Talk. I have to talk with it." Xianxia thought for a moment and said, "We have no intention to offend you, and we just want to pass through. Please allow us passage." "I promise we're just passing through." Big Black hurriedly nodded as well to display that they were just passing through. "No!" The Rock Titan's voice was like a thunderclap as it pointed its axe at Xianxia. "Human, leave or die." Clearly, it refused to talk. Xianxia glanced at it, fell silent for a while, and then suddenly said, "Since you don't welcome us, then farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia patted Big Blackie, and the latter immediately turned around and left. The Rock Titan withdrew its axe when it saw this. However, Big Blackie suddenly transformed into a ray of dark light that shot towards Rock Mountain. Big Blackie was extremely swift and had instantly passed by the Rock Titan and vanished into the distance. Go around? Xianxia didn't want to go around. He couldn't see anything in this damnable place. If he tried to go around, then they might encounter some sort of monster. Moreover, he didn't want to waste time. Since this was the fastest route, then why go around it? Even though the Rock Titan refused them passage, what could the Rock Titan do if they were fast? The Rock Titan was extremely strong, and it could even push Big Blackie back, so it was obvious how terrifying its strength was. Thus, Xianxia hadn't chosen to go head-on against it. After all, he just wanted to pass through. Big Blackie was swift indeed, and it had left the Rock Titan far behind in just an instant. However, Xianxia's expression changed just a few moments later. Because a rock axe was rapidly approaching from behind them, the axe carried extremely terrifying force, and it had even locked onto them. So it was impossible to avoid. He could only go head-on against it. Xianxia turned around, drew his sword, and swung it. Bang! The rock axe was blasted away. However, Xianxia was blasted flying by the impact as well, and he flew around 10 kilometers away. Once he stopped himself, Xianxia looked down at his hand, and he noticed that his palm had cracked open. Moreover, cracks had appeared throughout his arm. What terrifying strength! Xianxia took a deep breath and looked up. The ground not too far away from him was trembling, and then the head of a rock titan emerged from there. It didn't take long for the rock titan to appear before Xianxia and Big Blackie. Xianxia circulated his violet energy to repair his arm while he gazed at the rock titan. "Brother, we just want to pass through. Human, die." As soon as it finished speaking, it swung its rock axe again, and the rock axe descended rapidly in Xianxia and Big Blackie's direction. Xianxia didn't try to use his ability to locate flaws. Because the rock titan was too physically strong, he couldn't overcome that strength at all. Xianxia stopped holding back and took a step forward before two types of terrifying intents appeared out of thin air. After that, the intents coiled together and swept towards the rock axe. Bang! The rock axe was instantly blasted away on collision. However, the intents hadn't vanished, and they didn't slow down at all as they slammed against the rock titan. Ha! The rock titan shouted with fury, and it raised its other axe and swung it forward. Bang! Xianxia's intents shattered into bits, and the aftershock swept towards the rock titan. However, it merely took 2 steps back before it stopped moving. Moreover, it was completely unharmed. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched at the sight of this. That fellow's defenses are even stronger than the celestial demon hegemon body. Yang Yi had no way to fight the rock titan because he couldn't pierce the fellow's defenses. Unless he activated the sword god seal and raised his sword intent to the returnal rank, of course. Only then would it be possible for him to pierce through the rock titan's defenses. But what about after the battle? This was the ominous territory. It wasn't clouds of Heaven City. Anything here may pose a threat to his life. Yang Yi fell silent for an instant, and then he gazed at the rock titan which was about to attack. "I think we can talk about it." Swish. The reply Yang Yi got was a rock axe. It was spinning rapidly as it slammed down towards Yang Yi, and the space in its wake warped. Even though the space in its wake was merely being warped, it was extremely terrifying. After all, that overlapped heaven-rend Yang Yi executed earlier hadn't even been able to tear open the space here. So, it was obvious how strong the space here was. Yang Yi naturally didn't dare to act carelessly. He sheathed his sword while his profound energy circulated madly. At the same time, both his intents surged madly into the ancient sheath. Once the huge axe arrived around 3 m away from him, Yang Yi swiftly drew his sword and swung it. OM! An ear-piercing sword howl shot up into the air. Everywhere it passed, the miasma around it was pushed backwards like a receding tide. Bang! A loud explosion resounded at the point of collision, and then a terrifying wave of energy swept towards the surroundings. Yang Yi was pushed backwards repeatedly while the axe was blasted away towards the rock titan. The rock titan stretched out its hand and grabbed the axe. Bang! A huge wave of force swept through its body, and it couldn't help but move a few meters back. But Yang Yi had been pushed around 300 m back. Yang Yi glanced at his arm. At this moment his entire arm was numb, and it was like he'd lost all feeling in that arm. That fellow was too terrifying. It could be said that if the Celestial Demon Lord activated the Celestial Demon Hegemon body and fought that Rock Titan, the Demon Lord would definitely lose to the Rock Titan. Its defenses were formidable to a horrifying level. It wasn't just its defenses that were horrifying, even its strength was horrifying. "Human, you deserve death." Meanwhile, the Rock Titan raised its axe and swung it at Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyelids twitched at the sight of this. The most terrifying part of the Rock Titan's attacks weren't the strength they carried but the fact that they could lock onto their target. Just like this very moment, it had locked onto Yang Ye's aura, so he couldn't avoid it at all. Because not only had it locked onto him, it was extremely swift as well. Right when Yang Yi was about to attack when Big Blackie charged forward and slammed itself against the rock axe. Boom! The rock axe was blasted away, and Big Blackie was pushed backwards repeatedly. Yang Yi didn't just stand by idly. He flashed onto Big Blackie's back and said, "Let's go!" Big Blackie immediately transformed into a ray of dark light that vanished into the distance. Since they couldn't win, they had to flee. Yang Yi hadn't forgotten what he'd told Zhuang Weiran. At this moment, he couldn't defeat his opponent, so he had to flee. Only an idiot would continue fighting the Rock Titan when it was impossible to win. After all, he was here for the Forest of Darkness. Of course, the main reason was that he had no way to defeat the Rock Titan. Big Blackie rose its speed to its limits. However, Yang Yi could still sense the Rock Titan behind them. Even though the Rock Titan was huge, it was extremely quick. However, when Big Blackie rose its speed to its limits, the gap between them and the Rock Titan was growing larger and larger. This allowed Yang Yi to heave a sigh of relief. He really didn't want to fight the Rock Titan, and he presumed that even Big Blackie didn't want to. After all, even if they weren't beaten to death, they would be exhausted to death in a battle with it. A short while passed before Big Blackie suddenly stopped. Yang Yi was stunned. It didn't take long for him to look up into the distance, and then the corners of his mouth instantly twitched. After that, a droplet of cold sweat flowed down his forehead. In an instant, Yang Yi gulped and said, "Big Blackie, let's go back to that Rock Titan." What had they seen? There were 21 Rock Titans not too far away from Yang Yi and Big Blackie. Those Rock Titans were like towering pillars that obstructed their path. Every single rock titan was either holding a pair of axes, or a pair of huge sabers or hammers that were even larger than Big Blackie. This time, Xianxia felt that he might be about to meet his maker. At this moment, the rock titan behind him had caught up. 22 rock titans were staring at Xianxia and Big Blackie, causing a chill to run down Xianxia's spine. Even though he couldn't see Big Blackie's face, he knew that it was definitely unsightly. As soon as it saw Xianxia and Big Blackie, the rock titan behind them instantly intended to attack. Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly raised his hands. "I surrender. I really surrender. I'm not joking this time." The rock titan behind Xianxia didn't pay any attention to what Xianxia had just said, and it just threw its axe at Xianxia. Xianxia's eyelids twitched. He didn't dare act carelessly. He immediately turned around, drew his sword, and swung it. Heaven Rend that was enhanced by 2 types of intents. Only a Heaven Rend enhanced by 2 types of intents could barely resist the rock titan's strength. Otherwise, he would be no match for the rock titan. At this moment, all moves or the ability to locate flaws were useless. Pure strength could crush everything. If the gap between their strengths wasn't very huge, then he could locate the flaws in the rock titan's attack and destroy the attack. However, it was impossible when the gap between their strength was too huge. He had to go head-on against it. Bang! His sword collided with the axe, and then his figure was blasted away. However, it didn't take long for him to stop himself this time. A moment later, he transformed into a ray of light that shot forward swiftly and instantly appeared before the rock titan. Death by a thought. Xianxia hadn't used this move for a very long time. It was none other than because its might couldn't be compared to Heaven Rend. The reason he'd executed it now was because it could improve his speed so he could get closer to the rock titan even more quickly. Otherwise, he would always have to passively ward off the rock titan's attacks. The rock titan had clearly not expected Xianxia to suddenly become so swift, and it was caught off guard. Xianxia's sword stabbed straight against its chest. Bang! The rock titan moved over 30 m back while Xianxia was pushed over 300 m back. Moreover, his entire arm felt numb. As for the rock titan's chest, there was only a hole there, but that hole was practically unnoticeable on the rock titan's huge figure. Xianxia couldn't stab it to death. Even if it just stood there and let Xianxia strike it, it would probably be very difficult for Xianxia to kill it. Even though it was quite a blow to his confidence, it was a fact. The rock titan's defenses weren't just stronger than the celestial demon hegemon body, it was very much stronger. The celestial demon hegemon body relied on external forces to strengthen one's physical defenses for a period, but the rock titan hadn't relied on any external forces. Its body was always that strong. The rock titan was clearly infuriated from being injured. It immediately spun on the spot, and its axe swept out horizontally. Everywhere it passed, cracks appeared throughout space. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he took a step forward. Quasi-returnal rank sword intent and slaughter intent surged out from him, but it didn't take long for his sword intent and slaughter intent to shrink back, and then it suddenly erupted. The brink laws. The brink of both slaughter intent and sword intent. Bang! An explosion that shook the sky resounded. The rock axe was blasted back at a speed that was practically undetectable to the eye. This time, the rock titan hadn't been able to catch it, and it struck the rock titan's chest. Bang! The rock titan moved backwards repeatedly, and it moved around 300 m back before it finally stopped. Moreover, cracks had appeared on its chest. However, Xianxia's face grew even more solemn, because the might of 2 quasi-returnal rank intents at the brink was absolutely terrifying. It could be said to be only inferior to an overlapped Heaven Rend. However, it hadn't caused any material harm to the rock titan. Xianxia was on the verge of despair against the rock titan's defenses. The rock titan was clearly exasperated from being injured by Xianxia again, and it was even before its own kind. Terrifying waves of violent aura surged incessantly from within it, and its axes started to spin rapidly. The space around the rock titan warped before his spinning axes. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. Looks like that fellow is about to use a powerful technique. Xianxia tightened his grip on the ancient sheath. He knew that he couldn't hold back this time, and he had to overlap his Heaven Rends. Otherwise, he may not have another chance to attack. His defenses were very strong, but they absolutely couldn't resist the Rock Titan's axes. After all, the Rock Titan's strength far surpassed the physical defenses he possessed. Xianxia didn't make Big Blackie help because the other Rock Titans hadn't interfered in the battle. If Big Blackie lent him a hand, then those Rock Titans would definitely join the battle as well. At that time, both of them would definitely be finished. Even though he didn't know why those Rock Titans didn't attack, he couldn't be bothered about that. At this moment, he had to think about how he would resist this Rock Titan's attack. The Rock Titan was about to attack when a voice suddenly resounded, "Shirba! Wait a moment." The Rock Titan called Shirba immediately stopped and gazed at the group of Rock Titans. Xianxia looked over as well. His gaze descended onto a Rock Titan who held a pair of huge sabers. He noticed that Rock Titan with dual sabers was slightly larger than the others, and it stood at the front of the group. Obviously, it was the leader. That Rock Titan gazed at Xianxia and asked, "You're a sword cultivator?" Xianxia nodded. A long moment of silence ensued before the Rock Titan said, "You can go." Xianxia was stunned. "That fellow intends to let me leave?" Xianxia asked, "Why?" The Rock Titan with the huge sabers replied, "No reason. Just leave." Xianxia was speechless. Shirba was clearly quite displeased. It immediately intended to say something, but that Rock Titan with the dual sabers glared at Shirba. Shirba was clearly quite afraid of that Rock Titan and didn't dare glare back at it. Shirba just glared fiercely at Xianxia instead. Even though Xianxia was really curious why that Rock Titan intended to let him go, Xianxia didn't ask again. The most important matter at hand was to leave. After all, what would he do if that fellow regretted its decision? There were so many Rock Titans here, so Xianxia had no chance against them. Xianxia sat on Big Blackie. Big Blackie understood his intentions and was about to leave. The Rock Titan with the dual sabers suddenly said, "You're not turning back?" Xianxia shook his head. "I'm going to the Forest of Darkness." The Forest of Darkness? The Rock Titan with the huge sabers shook its head. "You'll die before you get there. This isn't a place you should be. It's not too late to leave right now. Once night arrives, then not to mention a single celestial demon wolf, even 10 won't be able to save you." Xianxia frowned. "It's that terrifying?" "It's much more terrifying than you've imagined." The Rock Titan continued, "Your natural talent isn't bad, and your strength isn't bad as well, but you're too young. Come here in 10 years, and there'll probably be nothing here that can pose a threat to you. Yet now, it's best for you to leave." The demon wolf beneath Xianxia hurriedly nodded to display its agreement. Xianxia remained silent for a long time, and then he said, "Thank you for the warning, but I must go there." Actually, if it was possible, he didn't want to stay in this damnable place for a moment longer. It was an absolutely terrifying place. Now, he finally understood why the celestial demon wolves weren't willing to come here. There really were quite many here that were stronger than the demon wolves. Simply speaking, even with his current strength combined with the 2 demon wolves, the ominous territory still was extremely dangerous. But he had to continue forward. As far as he was concerned, he would have a chance to survive if he continued. But if he didn't, then he could only wait for death to arrive. 2 months in the outside world was around 2 years within the primordial pagoda, and it wasn't realistic to attain a breakthrough in such a short period, because he'd just attained the Voider realm. He wasn't that great to be capable of immediately charging into the semi-deity realm. The Rock Titan didn't speak further when it heard Xianxia insist. Xianxia didn't say anything else as well, and he immediately rode Big Blackie and vanished from the Rock Titan's fields of vision. Patriarch, why? Once Xianxia and Big Blackie left, Shirba gazed at the Rock Titan with dual sabers. Shirba wasn't the only one, the others gazed at that Rock Titan as well. Because Shirba's question was the exact same question that they had in their hearts. The Rock Titan with dual sabers looked in the direction that Xianxia had vanished towards and said, "He had a trace of that person's aura." Once they left Rock Mountain, Xianxia and Big Blackie continued forward. Dense miasma still filled the road ahead. Needless to say, Xianxia was quite confident in his trip to the Forest of Darkness. Yet now, The cruel reality before him told him that this damnable place was much more terrifying than he'd imagined. Zhuang Weitian only knew that the Forest of Darkness existed, but he'd never been there. Or it should be said that Zhuang Weitian hadn't even been to Rock Mountain. If he had, he would probably not exist in the world anymore. So, Zhuang Weitian had felt that Yang Ye's strength should be sufficient here if Yang Yi didn't go over Yellow Springs River. However, it wasn't that simple. There was no need to even pass Yellow Springs River because just the outer area was extremely terrifying. Yang Yi took a deep breath and looked up into the sky. The sunlight coming from high above was growing weaker and weaker. Obviously, sunset was approaching. In other words, night was coming. Once night arrived, a long time passed before Yang Yi shook his head and chuckled. When did I become so cowardly? As soon as he finished speaking, he patted Big Blackie on the back. Big Blackie understood his intentions and sped up. Since he'd chosen to travel to the Forest of Darkness, then he didn't want to think about what-ifs. There was trouble ahead? That's fine. He would just fight it. What if he couldn't overcome the trouble? That would be fine as well. He would just flee. What if he couldn't escape? It wouldn't. It was a problem. If he couldn't escape, then he would have no choice but to fight desperately. In any case, he, Yang Yi, had never feared fighting desperately and risking his life. Around 2 hours later, the sunlight in the sky had vanished, and the veil of night gradually descended. The miasma in the surroundings grew thicker and thicker. It could be said that he couldn't see anything in front of him now. Fortunately, he had Big Blackie, or he wouldn't even be able to discern the direction he was heading towards. The difference was that Big Blackie was a beast, so it could use its instinct and sense of smell to determine the direction it was heading towards. Moreover, it was an ominous beast that used to live here, so the miasma didn't really affect it. Suddenly, Big Blackie stopped. Yang Yi was puzzled. He was about to speak when he suddenly looked up towards the distance, and his pupils constricted when he saw the scene there. He cried out involuntarily, "What the fuck is that?" Balls of flames. Numerous fist-sized balls of flames were floating within the miasma not too far ahead from them. These balls of flames seemed like specters that were floating about within the miasma. There was quite a huge amount of them, and they filled Yang Ye's field of vision. It was dangerous. That was what Yang Yi felt right now. Big Blackie was clearly extremely terrified, and the hairs on the top of its head were standing on end. Yang Yi asked, "What are those?" Big Blackie shook its head. Yang Yi was quite shocked. "Even you don't know?" After all, Big Blackie had been living in the ominous territory, yet it actually didn't know. It didn't take long for Yang Yi to understand why. Even though Big Blackie used to live here, it only remained within the confines of its own territory. Or it should be said that it didn't possess any territory, and it just traveled around the outer area with Little Blackie. Because they didn't dare to go deep into the ominous territory. After all, their strength was sufficient to escape even if they couldn't defeat the dangers they encountered in the outermost area of the ominous territory. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and looked at the balls of flame. What exactly is the ominous territory? Everything within this place is terrifying. If all of them were to leave this place, then perhaps only the large world would be able to resist them. Everyone was curious, and Yang Yi was no exception. He wanted to find out about the origins of the ominous territory. However, he was very well aware that he didn't possess such strength yet. It was quite embarrassing, but he'd thought that once he attained the Voider Realm and quasi-returnal rank sword intent, then nothing in the lower dimensions could pose a threat to the joint forces of him, the two celestial demon beasts, and Xianxia. However, the cruel reality in the ominous territory told him that he, Yang Yi, was just a little bit stronger than some people. The world was huge, and there were all sorts of things in the world. There were countless experts as well. As they say, there's always someone stronger. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and then he looked up towards the distance. There were two choices before him. The first was to continue forward, and the second was to go around. As for going back, he'd never thought about that. Yang Yi remained silent for a moment before his eyes suddenly lit up because he'd almost forgotten something. The sword domain, the laws of darkness, and the spatial laws. As soon as he thought about them, Yang Yi immediately sent Big Blackie back into the primordial pagoda, and then he started to merge himself with the space around him. However, he wasn't able to. Why? Because the space here was too solid. Moreover, Xianxia noticed that some sort of mysterious energy seemed to be present in space, causing him to be unable to enter space at all. It was even impossible to travel through space. The only way to tear space open was by force. Since he couldn't merge into space, he could only utilize the laws of darkness. He hadn't used the laws of darkness for a very long time. It wasn't because he'd forgotten it, but it was quite useless against semi-deities and deities. Experts at the semi-deity and deity realm possessed comprehensions of the world that were at an extremely formidable level. So, it wasn't really realistic to think about utilizing the laws of darkness to attach himself to their shadow and launch a surprise attack on them. It wasn't just the laws of darkness, even the laws of speed and decay weren't very useful to him now, because his strength had completely surpassed the scope of those laws. Now, only the brink laws were really useful to him. No, the laws of darkness was useful too. For example, now that darkness had descended upon this place, he could utilize the laws of darkness. Even though it was useless in battle, it was quite good when used for escaping or concealment, especially when it was combined with the sword domain's ability to conceal his aura. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to notice his presence at all. Once he concealed himself, Xianxia shot towards the distance. Even though he was being concealed by the sword domain and laws of darkness, Xianxia still didn't dare to act carelessly at all. This place was extremely mysterious, so he couldn't guarantee that the sword domain and laws of darkness would be successful. If he were discovered, then he would be in deep trouble. Xianxia gradually grew closer to the balls of flames. It didn't take long for the nearest ball of flame to be around 1 m away from Xianxia, and he finally saw it clearly. Actually, it was a small ball of flame. It was around the size of a watermelon, and it was completely round. Xianxia noticed that a small being which seemed like a butterfly resided within the ball of light. Actually, based on its appearance, it was a butterfly. However, there was something different about it. Firstly, it seemed like it was made of fire, and it was completely fiery red. Secondly, there were 3 spikes that were fine like needles on the end of its abdomen. At this moment, the little fellow seemed to be sleeping. Even though Xianxia was curious about what it was, he wasn't stupid enough to disturb the little fellow's sleep. Perhaps it was because of the ball of flame, but his divine sense couldn't scan the butterfly and determine its realm of cultivation. However, it was obvious that the butterfly was definitely not ordinary. After all, could anything capable of living in the ominous territory be ordinary? The ordinary beings were definitely dead by now. Xianxia sized it up for a moment, and then he vanished on the spot. A chill couldn't help but run down Xianxia's spine as he passed through this place, because there were at least over 10,000 small balls of fire here. Even if they were just semi-deities, it would be over 10,000 semi-deities. I have to leave as soon as possible. Xianxia sped up, but he didn't dare to move too quickly as he was afraid of waking them up. If he were to wake them up now and be detected by them, then he would definitely die. Xianxia suddenly stopped after walking for a while, because there was a huge ball of flames not too far ahead. That ball of flames was at least 3 times larger than the others here. There was a butterfly-shaped demon beast within it as well. Xianxia didn't know what it was, so he considered them to be demon beasts for now. The demon beast within the large ball of flames wasn't just larger than the others. It was dark red in color, while the others were just light red. Obviously, it was the leader. If I get it under my control, then will it be equivalent to taking control of all the other little fellows? Such a thought had suddenly appeared in Xianxia's mind, and it scared him. After all, it was too insane. If it really was possible, then he could sweep through the entire lower dimensions with the help of these balls of flames. However, he was only thinking about it, because if he failed, then he would be courting death. Moreover, his objective was the forest of darkness and not these balls of flames. Xianxia glanced at the big ball of flames, and then his figure shook slightly and vanished on the spot. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief when he left the area. This place was truly too mysterious. Moreover, this was just the outer area, and the inner area was beyond Yellow Springs River. But just this area was already so mysterious and terrifying, so what was it like beyond Yellow Springs River? How about the deepest parts of the ominous territory? What was it like there? Yang Yi was curious, absolutely curious. However, he wouldn't go have a look. Curiosity killed the cat, and he knew that very well. As far as he was concerned, he intended to leave once he got the spring of life. In any case, he didn't want to stay here a moment longer than what was necessary. After he left the area, Yang Yi didn't continue forward, and he found a spot to sit down cross-legged instead. The battle at Rock Mountain had consumed a huge amount of his profound energy, so he had to recover it first. Besides that, his physical strength had to recover as well. He had to maintain his peak strength at all times while he was here. Yang Yi sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and started madly absorbing the energy within the divine crystals he placed around himself. He immersed his consciousness into his body. Even though he hadn't entered the primordial pagoda, he could sense and see everything within the primordial pagoda. Xiao Yushi was still cultivating at the 3rd level. Presently, she was cultivating like a mad woman. It was mainly because she hoped to help Yang Yi, and she didn't want to be a burden to him. Yang Ye's footsteps were too quick, and it was so quick that a Nanjing was his only partner that could follow closely behind him. Fortunately, she had the cultivation room on the 3rd level, so her speed of cultivation was improved, and it wasn't that impossible to catch up to Yang Yi now. Yang Yi watched her for a while before he looked at the celestial demon wolves. At this moment, both of them were lying on the ground and greedily absorbing the spirit energy in the surroundings. The spirit energy in the primordial pagoda wasn't just pure, it was extremely abundant. So it was like a paradise to them. However, there was a trace of worry in both their eyes. Because Yang Yi was in the ominous territory. As far as they were concerned, whether Yang Yi could leave safely was absolutely uncertain. Yang Yi withdrew his consciousness and focused on absorbing the spirit energy within the divine crystals. Around an hour later, Yang Yi opened his eyes and continued forward. At this moment, it was late at night, and the miasma in the surroundings was dense to a horrifying degree. It was absolutely impossible to see anything. Presently, his divine sense couldn't even leave his body, and he could see nothing besides miasma. Even if he lowered his head, he couldn't see his own feet. Besides that, the miasma was extremely corrosive, and even his dual quasi-returnal rank intents were barely able to protect him. Moreover, the miasma was still growing thicker. Presently, Yang Yi felt like someone who was blind and deaf. Suddenly, he stopped moving, glanced at the surroundings, and then frowned. Something feels off. Yang Yi observed his surroundings carefully, but he didn't find anything. Was I mistaken? Yang Yi shook his head. He was concealing himself with the laws of darkness and the sword domain, so he felt that he should be safe. Moreover, there was no movement around him. Even though he couldn't see anything, he could detect movements if there was any. Yang Yi continued forward. However, a pale hand suddenly descended onto his shoulder. How did Yang Yi feel right now? Horrified. The hairs throughout his body were standing on end, and he had quite an unsightly expression on his face. Not only had someone noticed him, that person had arrived behind him without making a single sound. Calm down. Yang Yi circulated his sword intent to force himself to calm down, and then he turned around. However, there was nothing behind him. Nothing at all. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. He naturally wouldn't think that he was hallucinating. If he couldn't even differentiate between a hallucination and reality, then how could he even call himself a sword cultivator? That hand had appeared on his shoulder, but it was gone now. In other words, that person had concealed himself or herself. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he turned around and continued forward. He didn't know who it was, but he knew that the person would definitely appear once more. However, right after he turned around, that hand suddenly appeared on his shoulder again. Yang Yi turned around and swung his sword. Hiss! His attack hit nothing. There was nothing in front of Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly while seriousness filled them. This wasn't just strange. It was quite horrifying. He didn't believe that anyone in the lower dimensions was capable of being so fast that he couldn't even react. How is that person doing it? It didn't take long for Yang Ye's expression to change. He'd thought of something. What if that person doesn't just touch my shoulder but attacks instead? After all, he'd only sensed that person's presence after the hand touched his shoulder and not when that person appeared behind him. So the difference was huge, because it represented that if that person wanted to kill him, then he might have only sensed that person's presence at the same instant that he died. Besides that, that person was actually able to notice his presence. After all, he was using the laws of darkness and the sword domain to conceal himself. It could be said that if he stood here without moving, then even a deity wouldn't be able to notice his presence. Yet now, that mysterious person hidden in the shadows had noticed his presence. Xianxia remained silent on the spot for a long time, and then he turned around and continued forward. He just turned around when the hand appeared on his shoulder again. Xianxia stopped, but he didn't turn around. He just turned his head slightly to glance at the hand. It was slender and slightly pale, but its nails were bright red. Obviously, it belonged to a woman. Xianxia thought for a moment and said, "Big sister, I'm just passing through and have no intention to offend you." Xianxia received no answer, but the hand was still on his shoulder. Xianxia turned around, but when he did, there was nothing behind him. Xianxia's face darkened. "Do you think this is fun?" He still received no answer. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and then he turned around and continued walking towards the distance. This time, the hand didn't appear on him again. However, Xianxia knew that woman was definitely somewhere close. But since that woman had no intention to kill him, he couldn't be bothered to pay attention to her. Of course, the main reason was that he was helpless against her. Actually, he could detect her, but he didn't do it. She clearly didn't want him to see her, so if he really did make her visible to him, then it might cause some undesirable consequences. Moreover, using that method was very risky, so he didn't dare to use it rashly. The method was naturally the sword domain. He just had to activate it, and the woman would definitely be unable to hide. However, if she suddenly attacked while enveloped beneath the sword domain, then he would be finished if her strength surpassed the scope of the sword domain. After all, he only had over 2 months of lifespan left. Even though he knew that woman was watching him from the shadows, he didn't pay any attention to her and just continued forward. Actually, under normal circumstances, it would take around 5 or 6 hours for him to get to the Forest of Darkness, but he wasn't under normal circumstances right now. If he flew right now, it would be like painting a huge target on his back. He didn't want to become someone's punching bag, so he had no choice but to walk. According to Xianxia's estimations, he was around a day away from the Forest of Darkness. Could be said that it was just a short distance away, but Xianxia felt like it was extremely far away. After all, getting there safely was a huge problem. The further he went, the more solemn Xianxia's expression grew. It was silent, too silent. Since that mysterious hand appeared on his shoulder, it had been too silent. There wasn't a shred of noise coming from the surroundings. Not only was there no noise, he hadn't even heard the slightest sound of the wind. It was like he'd walked into the void. Suddenly, Xianxia stopped moving because the ground beneath his feet had vanished. Xianxia remained silent for an instant, and then he stretched his right hand forward before spinning it slightly. A strand of energy immediately surged out, and then the miasma before him was instantly blasted backwards, allowing him to see the scene before him. An abyss was before him, a bottomless abyss, and it was filled with miasma. As for the area on the other side of the abyss, it was a mountain which extended beyond the scope of his vision. Xianxia sized up the surroundings. It didn't take long for his gaze to descend to a spot not too far away from him. There was a rope bridge there, and it led to the mountain. Xianxia was about to head over through the rope bridge when an ethereal figure suddenly appeared on the rope bridge. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly while his profound energy immediately started to circulate. Based on the ethereal figure's body, Xianxia discerned that it belonged to a man. So, it was clearly not the owner of that hand from before. Suddenly, the ethereal figure spoke. "I can't remember how many years have passed. Someone has finally come here." Xianxia asked, "You're human?" "Of course." The ethereal figure fell silent for a while, and then it continued, "The Voider Realm? How could you have possibly been able to get here?" "Oh, no wonder." You possess two types of quasi-returnal rank intents. No wonder. Yang Yi asked, "Who are you?" "I know you're very curious," the ethereal figure continued. "After all, anyone would be curious upon meeting a human here. I'm from the large world." The large world. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly while a trace of surprise flashed through them. He hadn't expected the ethereal figure to be someone who'd come down here from the large world. Yang Yi sized up the ethereal figure and asked, "You're in spirit form?" The ethereal figure nodded slightly. "I know what else you wish to know, so I'll tell you in one go. The people of the lower dimensions are curious about this place, and the people of my large world are the same. So we decided to come down here and have a look. We intended to find out exactly what the ominous territory was. I'm one of the two who were sent down here." The ethereal figure fell silent for a long time, and then he continued. "This place exceeded our expectations, and both of us overestimated our strength. In the end, he died, and only a strand of my soul remains." Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he asked, "Senior, may I know what realm of cultivation both of you were at?" The ethereal figure answered, "The deity realm." Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. It was very normal that a deity would die here. After all, this place was so dangerous. However, the ethereal figure suddenly added, "We were deities here, but we weren't deities in the large world." Yang Ye's face stiffened. They weren't deities. They were experts that surpassed the deity realm. They were deities here because their cultivations had been suppressed. Even though their cultivations had been suppressed, they were still experts above the deity realm. However, both of them had perished here. Yang Yi gulped and asked, "May I ask if you fell on the other side of the Yellow Springs River or on this side?" Yang Yi couldn't help but clench his fists once he finished asking the question. The ethereal figure replied, "This side." Yang Yi took a deep breath when he heard this. It wouldn't be a big deal if the ethereal figure had perished on the other side of Yellow Springs River, and the situation wouldn't be that bad. After all, he wasn't going to the other side. However, the ethereal figure had died without even passing the Yellow Springs River. At this moment, Yang Yi really missed someone. Blind maiden. If he had the chance to meet her, he would definitely say, "Third sister, please take me to the Forest of Darkness." Actually, it was no joke. If he could contact her, he would definitely seek her help. Now, he finally understood that this place was actually not a place that he could stay in. The dangers of this place had far surpassed the scope of his strength. Perhaps only an expert at Blind Maiden's level could stay in this place. Meanwhile, the ethereal figure spoke. "I wish to seek your help." Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and gazed at the ethereal figure. "What do you need?" As soon as Yang Yi finished speaking, a spatial ring flew over to him. "I'm from the Kong clan in the large world. If you head there in the future, then please pass that spatial ring to the current patriarch of the Kong clan. He will repay you for it." Yang Yi glanced at the spatial ring in his grasp and asked, "Aren't you afraid that I would take it for myself?" The ethereal figure replied, "Do I have a choice?" Yang Yi smiled. True. After all, he'd finally met someone after so long, so he had no choice but to choose Yang Yi. Yang Yi put the spatial ring away and asked, "Senior, have you been to the Forest of Darkness?" "The Forest of Darkness?" the ethereal figure asked. "You intend to go there?" Yang Yi nodded. "Yes." The ethereal figure said. "Forget it." Yang Yi was puzzled. "Why?" "Because you won't be able to get there." The ethereal figure spoke frankly. "Even though you're just a voider, I know that you're definitely extremely strong and have surpassed the strength of ordinary deities. However, you must realize that deities are trash here. So head back." As soon as he finished speaking, the ethereal figure grew fainter. Yang Yi remained silent on the spot. Even deities are trash. That was no joke. Deities really were trash here. Yet this was only the outer area. Why does the lower dimensions have such a terrifying place like the ominous territory? A long time passed before Yang Yi took a deep breath and looked at the mountain on the opposite side of the abyss. Should I continue forward and turn back? Actually, he had no choice but to go forward. If his lifespan wasn't a problem, then he would definitely not take such risks here. However, he had to head to the Forest of Darkness. He would have a chance to live if he went there, but he might lose that chance to live if he didn't head there. Suddenly, the vanishing ethereal figure cried out involuntarily with shock. "What's she doing with you?" "She." "Run." "She." Suddenly, a gust of wind swept by, and then the ethereal figure's voice stopped abruptly. Moreover, the ethereal figure had vanished in an instant as well. Xianxia felt quite horrified. He was sure that the ethereal figure's disappearance was definitely related to the mysterious woman, and he was even more certain that she'd attacked earlier. However, he hadn't been able to discern it clearly. So either her strength far surpassed his own, or her movement technique was special. He was more inclined to believe the former. Who exactly is she? Why is she following me? Why hasn't she attacked me? A string of questions had flashed through Xianxia's mind, but he didn't have an answer for them. Xianxia remained silent for a long time, and then he glanced at the surroundings. "Senior, I think that we can talk about it. If you have some unfinished wishes, then I won't refuse if it's within the scope of my ability." He couldn't figure out why the woman was following him but didn't kill him, but he guessed that it might be for a similar reason as the ethereal figure from before. She probably wanted his help. However, the woman didn't answer him. The corners of Xianxia's mouth twitched, and then he laughed bitterly. "Senior, if you have something to say, then just tell me. How would I know what you want if you refuse to tell me? If you just stay around him and keep putting your hand on me, do you realize how scary that is? I'm serious, we can discuss the matter." But he still didn't receive a reply. Xianxia fell silent for a long time, and then he continued forward. Actually, at this point, he knew that the mysterious woman had no ill intent towards him, because if she had the intention to kill him, then the primordial pagoda would have definitely warned him. However, it hadn't. He didn't think that her strength was so formidable that even the primordial pagoda couldn't sense it. Since the primordial pagoda hadn't warned him, it proved that she hadn't revealed any killing intent towards him. Even then, just thinking about how someone was following him made Xianxia feel extremely uncomfortable. Besides that, even though she hadn't attacked him now, who knew if she would do it later? Thus, he hoped that she would show herself and discuss the matter with him. After all, everything could be solved with some discussion. Unfortunately, she refused to show herself. So Xianxia had no choice but to ignore her for now. If she intended to show herself, then she would do it. In any case, he couldn't force her to show herself. While he traveled through the rope bridge, Xianxia couldn't help but glance down at the abyss below him. What's down there? Such a thought had appeared in Xianxia's mind, and he felt slightly curious. Of course, he wouldn't go mad and jump down there. However, he'd decided that he would come back here once his strength was sufficient. He was even more curious about the ominous territory. Once he passed through the bridge, a cave appeared in front of Xianxia. The cave was pitch black, and bone-piercingly cold gusts of wind swept out incessantly from within it. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and then he gazed towards the right. He pushed his right hand forward, and a wave of force swept out from his palm. It didn't take long for the miasma on his right to be pushed around 1 kilometer away, but he still only saw the body of a mountain. Xianxia's face darkened. How huge is this mountain? Xianxia fell silent for a moment, and then he tapped his right foot lightly against the ground and transformed into a ray of light which shot up into the air. Roar! Suddenly, a furious roar resounded in the sky, and then a huge claw tore open the miasma above Xianxia and clawed down at him. Xianxia's expression changed, and he immediately drew his sword and swung it. Bang! A loud explosion resounded in the sky. It didn't take long for a strangely shaped beast to appear where Xianxia had been a moment ago. The beast's head was like an eagle, but its lower body was a pair of legs that were extremely similar to the legs of humans. However, its legs were comparatively longer. There was a pair of black wings on his shoulders, and it had a claw. But the claw wasn't on its shoulder but on its chest. The beast's fist-sized eyeballs were scanning the surroundings incessantly, and its eyes were filled with a vicious glow. A short while passed, yet it didn't notice anything, so it shot up and vanished behind the miasma. Once the beast left, Yang Yi appeared on the spot. What the heck was that? Yang Yi frowned. That beast from before felt extremely dangerous to him. Could be said to be even stronger than the celestial demon wolves. Actually, if he really intended to fight it, then the joint forces of himself and the two demon wolves had a good chance at killing that beast. But he hadn't forgotten where he was. If he fought here, it would definitely draw the attention of many monsters. Yang Yi was quite conflicted. He had to pass through this mountain of unknown size, and there were 3 ways to do it. The first was to go around it, but who knew how huge the mountain was? He didn't know how long it would take him to go around it. The second way was to go above it, and he'd tried that just now. However, he'd been attacked by a powerful beast. There was one last way, and it was to go through the cave. However, that cave seemed quite horrifying. I can't go in there. His intuition told him that he couldn't go in because he didn't know what was luring within it. The unknown was always the most terrifying. Yang Yi took a deep breath and looked up because that was the only method he could choose. Since he'd made his decision, Yang Yi didn't hesitate a moment longer, and he immediately flew up. This time he acted much more carefully, and he slowly flew up, bit by bit. If it was possible, he didn't want to fight the best. After all, he merely intended to pass through. Yang Yi didn't know how high the mountain was. All he knew was that he still hadn't reached the top after floating up for around an hour. Suddenly, the miasma above him was torn open, and then a claw stretched out from the miasma and clawed forcefully in his direction. It noticed my presence. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Yang Ye's eyes. He stopped concealing himself, and the profound energy within him surged into the ancient sheath. At the same time, his slaughter intent and sword intent shot out and surged into the ancient sheath as well. Once the huge claw arrived around 1 m above him, he swiftly drew his sword and attacked. Bang! An explosion resounded, and the huge claw was blasted back into the miasma. After that, a furious howl resounded, and it carried a trace of pain. It didn't take long for the beast to appear above Yang Yi. It didn't waste a moment and immediately shot down towards Yang Yi. Once it arrived around 3 m away from Yang Yi, it suddenly opened its mouth and bit at Yang Yi. Obviously, it wasn't to swallow Yang Yi alive. Yang Yi shot up and swung his sword. Boom! An explosion reverberated through the miasma, and then rays of light flashed incessantly. At the same time, sword howls resounded incessantly through the sky. It naturally caused quite a huge commotion. However, Yang Yi didn't care right now. He was furious. After all, he merely wanted to pass through, and he had no intention to kill the best, yet it wanted to kill him. He felt that it deserved a beating. The beast was extremely strong, but it was inferior when compared to the rock titan from before. It was mainly inferior when it came to its defenses. As for its offensive capabilities, it wasn't inferior to the rock titan. However, its defenses were much weaker than the rock titan. So, Yang Ye's sword was entirely capable of piercing through its defenses. After all, he was using the sword precursor right now. After he attained the Voider realm, he wasn't so short on profound energy anymore. Moreover, he had the Worldmen's Stone as well. So, he could fight with the sword precursor without worrying too much about his profound energy. Moreover, the sword precursor was entirely capable of piercing through the beast's defenses. Bang! 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 Numerous explosions resounded incessantly in the sky. A long time passed before Yang Yi and the beast split apart amidst a loud explosion. At this moment, the beast's body was covered in injuries, and it seemed rather terrifying. As for Yang Yi, blood was flowing incessantly from the corner of his mouth. Obviously, he was injured. Fortunately, so long as it wasn't a lethal injury, then it was just minor to him. The beast stared at Yang Yi while viciousness filled its eyes. Yang Yi waved his sword and said, "Let me pass through, all right?" Roar! The beast roared with fury, and then a ray of black light erupted from its entire body. It didn't take long for a layer of thick black scales to appear throughout its body, and then it pounced at Yang Yi. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what's good for you." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi waved his right hand, and then the two celestial demon wolves emerged from within him. "Bash it to death." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia shot towards the beast. The demon wolves quickly charged forward as well. The beast was stunned when it saw the demon wolves. Obviously, it hadn't expected two ominous beasts to suddenly appear here. 3 against 1. The intent to retreat was visible in the beast's eyes, but it was too late. Big Blackie and Little Blackie were behind it. At the same time, Xianxia transformed into a ray of light that appeared in front of it. If the beast had the defensive abilities of the Rock Titan, then it would really not be a huge problem for it to resist the joint attacks of Xianxia and the demon wolves. Unfortunately, even though its offensive capabilities weren't inferior to the Rock Titan, its defensive capabilities were too inferior. The beast had practically no ability to fight back against their joint forces. So, not to mention fighting back, it didn't even have the chance to flee. However, the beast suddenly made a strange screeching howl, and it seemed to be calling for help. Xianxia's expression changed slightly, so, that fellow has help. Xianxia didn't dare delay, and he was about to attack. However, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something, and his eyes lit up. He fell silent for an instant before he gazed at the demon wolves. Quickly drag it into the pagoda! The demon wolves were slightly stunned when they heard Xianxia. It didn't take long for a wisp of excitement to flash through their eyes, and then they dragged the beast towards Xianxia. They were very swift to the point the beast wasn't even able to react before it was dragged into the primordial pagoda. Once they entered the primordial pagoda, both demon wolves released their grip on the beast, and then they moved to the side and laid on the ground. They had to keep a low profile here. The beast was first stunned, and then a ferocious gaze appeared in its eyes. Roar! It roared furiously, and then it raised the claw on its chest and slammed it down towards the ground. The demon wolves glanced at the beast, and then they soundlessly moved backwards. They felt that it was best to stay farther away from that fellow, so as to avoid suffering with it. When it saw the demon wolves move backwards, the beast thought that they were afraid and acted even more wildly. It was roaring. The beast roared madly and ceaselessly slammed its claw against the ground. It seemed like it wanted to destroy this world.